Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burak of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest, but I'm very interested in talking to him and learning about his industry. It's an exciting growth industry right now, and that is marijuana as it becomes more legalized and more mainstream. He's the founding editor and editorial vice president of Marijuana Business Daily. Chris Walsh, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this crazy, fast-growing industry.
Yes, and speaking of fast-growing industry, what's the marijuana growth rate right now?
Well, we track growth in this industry by retail sales, so it's kind of the end of the supply chain there. Just as a little bit of background, this industry does not have a lot of data behind it. We started doing industry reports in 2012. Severe lack of data. Most states don't track things. The federal government doesn't track anything, so it's hard to figure out, revenue levels and sales and even the number of marijuana business licenses in a particular state. So we've spent a lot of years researching this market. It's still kind of a nebulous area, but, according to our estimates, sales this year at the retail level for medical and recreational marijuana are going to hit, basically $5.5 to $6 billion, and that's up from 4 to 4.5 last year. So, that's a solid, around potentially 50% growth. And you don't find industries with billions of dollars in sales growing that quickly very often.
It's very interesting. And so that's not that figure that you guys have at Marijuana Business Daily. That's not counting any of the illegal sales, right? This is just the fully legalized, fully regulated sales.
Yeah, this is, and not even fully regulated. This is through storefront locations. So the dispensaries, where you can walk in the door and buy medical marijuana, the recreational shops that you can do the same. There's a black market, and then there is kind of pseudo-legal, like delivery-only places in states like California that don't have regulations yet. So this is what we kind of see as the main part of the legitimate industry. The black market sales, are in the, obviously in the tens of billions.
Yeah, I figured they were much larger, but as the industry becomes more mainstream, I'm reading this book now called Big Weed. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's a very interesting book, and he's a successful marijuana entrepreneur who struggled in Colorado around the Denver area, I believe. And a couple of years ago, he couldn't even put money in the banks. I think 3 different banks closed bank accounts on him within 5 weeks. So is the industry still dealing with those types of problems now in the United States?
Oh, yeah. I mean, banking is one of the biggest issues that companies that actually touch marijuana as opposed to provide services to the industry. Companies that touch marijuana still struggle with banking to this day. The situation has improved in the past couple of years, but a lot of these companies still don't have bank accounts, or they rotate through them yearly, if not multiple times each year. And the reason is that this is still a federally illegal product. So the main, big banks in this country won't work knowingly with the marijuana industry. So you can't go to a Wells Fargo and get a business account unless you kind of mislead them into thinking you're some, healthcare or wellness type businesses. Which a lot of companies do still, which they shouldn't. But so is what you're finding is in some cases this is an all cash business. In others, the companies are bouncing around from bank to bank to bank. And those that do have accounts are getting them typically at smaller, credit unions and banks in their community that aren't the big players that maybe they've had another business relationship with in the past. But it is still a major issue.
Yeah, and in that respect, I think the Canadian companies have a major advantage over the American ones because Canada, they can deposit directly into the banks. But before we talk about that, I want to ask you: have you heard anecdotally if any of the American marijuana companies are using Bitcoin or cryptocurrency to circumvent this? Is the marijuana business have they adapted to using Bitcoin and cryptocurrency faster than other industries?
No, a lot of people think that would be the case because of the challenges here, but you don't really see that playing out. I mean, I know some are accepting that kind of payment, and some have dabbled in it and then gotten out of it. You might see more activity as these cryptocurrencies kind of take off, although the fundamentals behind them are still, according to longtime finance people, are still really scary in the long run and risky. but it's not that big of a thing in this industry right now. And we'll see if it becomes it. But there are so many challenges right now in this industry that adding on the risk of dealing in a cryptocurrency, then trying to get real cash out of it, and then also potentially inviting even more scrutiny on you, from regulators or the government that's trying to track that, or sometimes think that that's usually used for illicit, illegal types of transactions. It just hasn't proven to be of interest to most businesses.
Yeah, and to add to your points there, cryptocurrency prices are also extremely volatile, both up and down. So it's not predictable like some of the more government-issued currencies right now. So until, that volatility goes down, cryptocurrencies for a regular business, that needs predictable cash flow every day is not ideal. But you guys have also a very large future growth rate for the marijuana industry. You guys are predicting that sales for retail will more than double in the next 5 to 10 years. Is that correct?
Not 10, definitely in the next, basically in the next 2 to 3 years. The main driver of that is new markets coming online, such as, and the biggest of which is California. By our projections, California itself will basically be the size of the current market this year in 4 to 5 years. So that is going to fuel a lot of the growth as California introduces state-regulated recreational marijuana. It's got a massive population. It's got a huge tourism draw, and it's very cannabis-friendly in general. So as that market takes off, it's going to fuel billions of new dollars in sales. But not to be overlooked, you have two other factors at play. You have a handful, more than half a dozen, 8, 9 states that are starting their medical or recreational marijuana industries in the coming years, and that's going to fuel growth. And often overlooked is that the mature medical and recreational marijuana states in this country, those that have had industries up and running for a couple of years and are regulated, those markets are still growing, and some of them are growing really quickly. So, we're just kind of scratching the surface of demand for medical and recreational marijuana, and our projection, or this could be a $17 billion industry in terms of retail sales in 5 years.
Wow, pretty impressive. Yeah, I was going to ask you, I have questions about how well the state of Colorado is doing so far, because it's been a couple of years now since they basically legalized it for recreational usage. Well, obviously, there's certain restrictions, but Colorado is making an enormous amount of tax revenues, and I'm sure if I was another state, like a Washington state or another state, I'd be very interested how I could start making, those types of similar tax revenues.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about recreational marijuana in Colorado, which was the first state to legalize and then start its industry, there was a lot of people saying the sky was going to fall and the quality of life was going to deteriorate, crime was going to soar, and it was going to be like a terrible development. Well, you know what the biggest complaint you hear in Colorado is right now about legalized marijuana? It's the population growth. People say, oh, so many people moved here because of this that, the roads are a bit more crowded and there's development everywhere and the old houses are being torn down for nicer ones. The cost of living has increased. And yeah, marijuana is part of that, but Colorado has a very strong economy. And I point this out in general because the complaints aren't, oh my God, our state, is suffering from, terrible crime waves and decay. It's quite the opposite. People are moving here in droves. Denver is one of the fastest growing cities in the nation. And so, people wouldn't be moving here if recreational marijuana was a terrible thing. So, yeah, I mean, the experiment here has been largely good. I mean, there are some problems. There are some people, of course, who aren't a fan of it for other reasons. But is what you find is that it blends into the landscape if it's well regulated, and strong regulations lead to professionals running these businesses, and lots of measures to make sure that that we're not going to see negative side effects of how these businesses are run. If you do that, it blends into the background, and people will pass recreational marijuana stores here, and they're right next to a Starbucks in a strip mall or whatever, and no one really notices it anymore.
That's very interesting. So, in terms of weed tourism, are they actually starting to build out, like marijuana, like really nice marijuana kind of hotels, or similar to like what microbreweries are with the experience where you can go see the weed being grown and there's like lounges and a restaurant. Is there those types of things being built right now in Colorado?
It's starting to develop. I think you had in the early days, and even to now, you have some like smaller bed and breakfasts that advertise themselves as kind of 420 friendly. 420 is the kind of pot slang, but that has not taken off. A lot of the major hotels, are not going in that direction. And Denver and Colorado has regulations that don't really allow at this moment social consumption. So it's not like you can go to a store selling marijuana and hang out there like a bar and use marijuana. Now Denver has passed a measure that would allow social consumption, as they call it, and it would allow businesses to let patrons consume on the property, but there's all these restrictions and they're not sure if it's going to work. The states that have legalized medical and recreational marijuana in large part have not really paved the way for those kind of opportunities and those types of businesses, but you will see that in the future. What we have now on the tourism side is, there's some companies that they'll take you around to the marijuana grows and the stores, and it's almost like a brewery tour. You can maybe consume in the shuttle or the bus. The driver isn't, of course, consuming. And
hopefully
so
not, right?
Yeah, hopefully not. So there's some of that, but you drive on the main highway from the airport into the city, and the highway is sponsored by different marijuana retailers. Sponsor a highway. You see the signs with their logos on it. I mean, it's crazy. They can't advertise on big billboards, and there's other restrictions, but they're kind of woven into the fabric of the community. And again, people that live here, really, after a while, it just becomes like any other business.
That sounds very cool. There's actually I don't know if you saw it, there's actually a really good documentary on Netflix. I think it was last year it came out about Breckenridge, Colorado allowing, small marijuana shops. So I thought that was pretty interesting for our listeners to check that out. Besides California, which other states in the United States are pretty close to legalizing marijuana soon?
Well, so California's legalized a while back medical. It was the first, state to really legalize medical marijuana a long time ago, and then had the first businesses. Then it legalized recreational marijuana last year, and its recreational industry is going to start in just a couple days here at the beginning of January. You have a bunch of states that actually legalized in the November election of last year, and they're moving forward with their programs. Nevada legalized recreational marijuana and started sales early. You can go to Nevada, you can go to Vegas now and go into a store, show your ID, and then go buy marijuana in Las Vegas. And the sales are off the charts there, as you can imagine, in that type of a city. And then you have other states that are moving forward with legalization. The big prizes, I think, on this end for next year, where the big business opportunities are going to be, if they push it through, is New Jersey, where you have the incoming governor who said, while running, that he would legalize recreational marijuana. You have lawmakers saying that during campaign season. He won, and he is promising to legalize recreational marijuana in New Jersey next year. Huge market. And maybe could get to over $1 billion in sales on its own, especially given its proximity to population-dense areas like New York City. And then, you have Michigan, where there's going to be a really promising effort to legalize recreational marijuana there next year as well. If that's successful, that will be another major new market. And then you have some other states that are smaller, like Vermont, that might move forward with some recreational marijuana measures. And then you have medical, marijuana states. A lot of them are the smaller markets. You might have Texas make a big move to legalize medical marijuana in the next couple of years, which would be huge. But the marijuana industry typically, and legalization typically, hasn't been able to infiltrate the South, as you can imagine, because of the politics there. But what you have is Florida has now legalized medical marijuana. You just had Louisiana, and now you've had Arkansas. So I would expect in the coming years, you're going to see that Bible Belt turn a little bit more green. So those will be some new new areas too.
Yeah, and marijuana is big business. I mean, it's a cash crop. So, as more of that illegal drug trade there from the marijuana industry, as more of it becomes legal, I mean, that's tens of billions of dollars. Like you said, could be, hundreds of billions of dollars eventually at some point down the line. Did the Washington State and Oregon, did they already open up to full legalization?
Yeah, both of those are hot markets as well. Both Washington State and Oregon currently allow recreational marijuana sales. They have, thriving industries that are still growing, and they're evolving, and you're seeing brands emerge, and hundreds of millions being made. The cities and states are, reaping tax dollars. Now, I'm not going to paint a completely positive picture of this. There are problems. There are problems with what they call the kind of infused product side. That's marijuana infused brownies and drinks and lotions. I mean, the list of products goes on and on. And if you're not familiar with this industry, it's kind of surprising how many things you can buy now that have marijuana in them and you can consume them. There's bath balls, you can put in a bath that have THC in them. It's really evolving as an industry, but there are still challenges in all these states. This is a new thing, and the states are feeling their way along. There's regulatory issues. The jury's still out on the overall social impacts. We just don't know yet in these states. It's still early. Like I mentioned, crime and all that. There's no evidence there's been, giant spikes in these type of things. But we don't know yet. We need more data. We need more time. So I'm not going to say that everything's 100% great, but think of the most popular cities in the country to move to right now. You can look this up. It is Denver. It is Seattle. It is Portland, Oregon. It is San Francisco. Consistently, those are in the top 5, and all have legalized marijuana. So again, when you're looking at the impacts of this, they're creating jobs, they're creating business opportunities, and they are not detrimental to society, and in fact can enhance the quality of life in these areas because they're creating this economic activity, which then leads to a bunch of other businesses opening up and people being employed and trickles throughout the economy.
I feel like it's a fallacy for the people who say, that marijuana industry causes a lot of crime. It's kind of similar to saying, marijuana is like a gateway drug to all these other more hardcore drugs. There's just not a lot of evidence supporting it. But I live 20 minutes right outside of Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. didn't fully legalize marijuana, but they're not really going to prosecute. It's just like a fine for either if you're caught in public, tiny little fine if you're caught smoking in public, or if you're caught with like a big bag of marijuana now. And basically, I think in Washington, D.C., if you go to Washington, D.C. to visit as a tourist, you can order marijuana from your hotel room and have it delivered in about an hour now.
Well, and you can grow at home there. Recreational marijuana and medical is legal. They have dispensaries for the medical side if you are a patient that meets certain conditions. It's actually the federal government that would not allow the city to start a recreational marijuana industry because they had ultimate control over that. But Washington did, as you pointed out, legalize recreational marijuana for adults. And it's crazy, there's sales going on and people growing legally, within sight of the DEA and the White House and DOJ. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about crime and all that, the real danger is the black market sales. There's, you can look to Colorado, Washington State, now Nevada. There hasn't been an increase in crime tied to this at all. And in fact, probably has lowered it in the marijuana side because guess what? You're buying marijuana in a store that has a bunch of regulations and it has security cameras everywhere, and things are packaged and tested, and they have labels and you know what you're getting, and that's a much safer way to buy this than on the street in someone's basement or whatever. And so this whole brand new part of the American economy is just come out of the shadows, and the negative effects just aren't there.
Now, earlier in the interview, we talked about some of the banking problems that the U.S. marijuana industry has. You guys put out an article, Chart of the Week, last month, November 27th, 2017, on the Marijuana Business Daily website. You showed the size of the two largest Canadian marijuana companies, which are Canopy Growth Corporation and Aurora Cannabis. They're both over $2 billion market cap. They're, almost tenfold, basically tenfold larger than the two American companies. Do you think that the Canadian marijuana companies have a big advantage over American marijuana companies?
Yeah, I mean, what's going on in Canada is fascinating. If you're interested in business and investment, as your listeners are, take a look at what's going on up there. Marijuana is legal. Medical marijuana is legal at the federal level in Canada. It has legalized federally, which means that it's like any other business. They do have regulations on it, restrictions and all that, but the companies up there have access to traditional bank accounts. They don't have the tax issues that the American businesses face, and that's something we haven't touched on, but the other major challenge here in the U.S. is that the businesses, marijuana businesses, are taxed basically at a much higher rate because of a stipulation in the federal tax code. Basically, they can't take a lot of the standard business deductions that other companies can, which really kills your bottom line. But in Canada, that's not the case. So that's a great example of what happens if they legalize federally here. And the government there is legalizing recreational marijuana federally next year, and they're moving along with regulations by province. And as what you're seeing, the difference is these are all federally sanctioned businesses. So, they're trading on the major exchanges there. And there's a huge swell of optimism and money coming into the industry, companies with billions of dollars in market cap. In the U.S., because it's not legal federally, most of the publicly traded stocks in cannabis are like penny stocks. A lot of them are like what we call ancillary company. They provide services, technology, products to the industry itself, but they don't touch the plant. And, it reminds me of the tech days. A lot of these companies are kind of hard to figure out what they're doing. There's no defined product they're selling. They're not really reporting their financials very well because they're on the, OTC markets. And so that's not a true reflection of the industry, but when you look at the publicly traded companies, Canada is light years ahead. And the other thing I just want to point out on this end, one of the reasons the companies in Canada are valued so high is because they are becoming global leaders in marijuana. They can export cannabis because it's legal. So that's exactly what they're doing. They're shipping marijuana across the world because more countries are legalizing medical and recreational marijuana. If you look at the map of countries that have legalized, it has exploded in the last couple of years. And Canada is leading that effort. They're coming over there with their knowledge and shipping marijuana and establishing production facilities in other countries. And the U.S. businesses are hamstrung. So that's where all the excitement in Canada is coming to. And when you have recreational marijuana being legalized next year federally, that's going to open up massive new doors in that market.
Yeah, I saw a long interview on Real Vision TV, which is for professional investors, and they showed, the grow houses of Canopy Growth. And it just looks remarkable, how they've turned an old Hershey chocolate factory into, a modern, scaled up, vertically integrated marijuana company. So they've raised, over 700, according to one of the articles on your website, over $700 million Canopy Growth and Aurora have raised in the last 18 months. So the Canadian companies are raising a lot more capital. Are the Canadian companies more vertically integrated, so they grow the product and then they come up with new services and new ways to innovate with the product?
Yeah, you have several trends playing out there. In recent times, under the regulations in Canada, the companies that win a license, you have to meet all these requirements and actually win a license to be in the industry. You can grow the marijuana and you sell it yourself, as you said, vertically integrated, but you have to sell it through the mail. You cannot open up a storefront. So patients will order it, and then you ship it to them via mail. It's very odd. And then you have a bunch of illegal dispensaries, the storefront locations that have opened up, and the government, both locally and federally, hasn't really cracked down on them. They've just kind of let them operate. They're trying to fix that for next year, but under the recreational marijuana legalization, each province will decide how this works. And what you're finding is the major provinces with most of the population density are kind of structuring it like alcohol in Canada, which is the government is actually going to run the marijuana stores. They will be government-operated stores. And then some provinces are doing a hybrid. Well, some will be government, some will be private, and then one or two might just allow private stores. It's very interesting, but that's how they do alcohol in much of Canada as well. So the Canada market's going to be a lot different in that the retail aspect is not going to be as big of a part of the industry as it is here. The retail, storefronts, because the government's going to run that.
That's interesting. Here in the state of Virginia, a lot of people don't know this, but the state of Virginia still has, the ABC stores. So all the liquor is not allowed to be sold at the grocery store or any of the other stores like a Costco. You have to go and buy it at a Virginia ABC store. So they have a monopoly on liquor sales. Whereas,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's how much of Canada's industry is going to work. The business opportunities there, or the people growing it, exporting it. And now the other thing that's been fueling the medical marijuana market there is the introduction of some of these infused products that I mentioned before, that companies can start selling those, and concentrates, which are highly concentrated forms of marijuana. And so that's opening up new doors. But in the future, that's where all the opportunities are. It's not going to be necessarily in opening a storefront marijuana shop in Canada.
Since there's so many challenges for the smaller United States companies, have you noticed yet if any of the large big tobacco corporations, big pharmaceutical corporations, big agricultural corporations here in the U.S. are starting to make investments and get involved in the industry?
Yeah, that's the next dam that's going to crack. We've been waiting for that for a couple of years, and you're starting to see some significant signs. Big tobacco, no, they're looking at it, absolutely. They'd be stupid not to. I mean, it's a huge potential growth avenue for them in like a stagnating industry. So they will deny they're looking at this industry. They are looking at this industry. Again, people should be fired at these companies if they're not, because of the growth potential. You see that in every major industry, like the ones you mentioned, big pharma, big ag, big tech, big tobacco. One of the biggest developments of this year was in the big alcohol space. Constellation Brands, which is one of the biggest global alcohol companies. It owns Corona and some other major brands. It invested a large sum in one of the Canadian marijuana companies. And the CEO says openly, we want to make marijuana-infused drinks. And they see this as a great growth potential. That was an example of a mainstream company that would not have touched this industry 3 or 4 years ago, making a big move into it. And the other big thing is Scott's Miracle-Gro, which I think most people are familiar with, has, bet $500 million on this industry as well. And the CEO at one point said he feels this is the biggest opportunity in lawn and garden that he's ever seen. So you do have these big mainstream companies that are starting to get involved. And once things loosen up in the U.S. at a federal level, which eventually they will, or once enough states start recreational marijuana industries, which they will, you are going to see these major players come in. And we hear about it all the time. We host these big business conferences for executives in this industry. Our last one in Vegas drew 18,000 professionals and investors. And you can bet there were people from all these major industries and major companies there to see what's going on in this industry. And most of them are surprised. They go and oh, wow, all the booths here look like things you'd see at any other conference. Technology companies, products and services, lawyers, consultants.
What are the technology companies interested in marijuana for exactly? I don't really see. Maybe I probably don't see what they see then.
There's tons of opportunities in tech in this industry. There's cultivation technology for automating, your grows. I mean, think of big agriculture, and what they're using to grow tomatoes and things on a massive scale. So there's cultivation technology. There's software for the retailers to, interact and take orders from customers. And there's B2B software out there so the companies can manage their relationships there. There are apps in California that connect patients to the dispensaries for marijuana deliveries. And some of them have landed a lot of money. In fact, that's been happening this year as you're seeing these tech companies in the industry landing some significant amounts of money. And when I say significant, this industry is still well behind. So I'm not talking hundreds of millions of dollars, but $10 million, $8 million, and that's a lot for this industry. But that's going to continue to grow. And tech, think of any other industry that needs technology. Every industry does. This one needs it too. And the thing you see with this industry is a lot of services need to be customized because of the unique challenges and structure of the marijuana industry. So the major players aren't touching it yet. So you're having people come in and trying to be the sales force of the cannabis industry, develop cannabis-specific POS systems, you name it. Because those big companies aren't coming in, their products don't work for this industry, and so people are filling that gap.
I heard one entrepreneur on another podcast, and he said that snack companies, like chip companies like Frito-Lay and those guys, and Utz and some of those have contacted them, and they're already testing in the lab, infusing cannabis inside their potato chips and snacks too, to get people to eat more.
Yeah, I have no doubt. Now, for those companies to come in, they're going to have to win licenses and meet all these regulations. It's not like they can just come into Colorado and start selling marijuana-infused Fritos. But yeah, I mean, they should be looking at this industry because, as I mentioned earlier, the breadth of products, of marijuana-infused products, is staggering if you have not seen it. You do have marijuana-infused gummy bears and cookies and, hard candies. And then you have, in some markets, other types of foods that are infused. You have infused fruit punches and sodas and lip balms and lotions. And, the list goes on. And, yes, down the road, will there be, a marijuana-infused version of Doritos that is very popular? Probably.
Do you think eventually then that this industry is going to be what the next $1 trillion industry then with all these potential products? Because there's also a bunch of medical and pharmaceutical products too. There's a biotech company called GW Pharmaceuticals on the NASDAQ said TVEX is the first natural cannabis plant derivative to gain market approval in any country.
Yeah, and GW is an interesting one because they are really approaching it from a medical standpoint and with research behind them. While in the U.S., the companies there is no research really because the federal government has banned universities and other groups from studying it. So, but yeah, GW is an interesting play. They're trying to get into the U.S. market and going through FDA approval process right now. And in terms of your question, next $1 trillion industry, that's, a ways off. But this will absolutely be one of the biggest industries, if not the biggest industry to emerge, in a generation. I mean, technology, of course, nothing will compete with that. But I can't really think of anything else that's going to hit the potential and the heights of this one that has been around in my lifetime.
Now, earlier in the interview, you talked about some major challenges the industry has to overcome, big hurdles. What are some of the biggest challenges that the industry has to overcome to get to the future that you see?
Well, I mean, there's the federal angle where we have to get a stability and a change in federal laws. That is the swampland that the whole industry is walking on right now. That's the foundation of it is volatile because it's not federally legal. So, with Donald Trump in office and Jeff Sessions leading the charge on law enforcement, we don't know if there's going to be a crackdown. And then, so there's a ton of uncertainty, which, businesses and investors hate. But on some aspects, it has given people who otherwise wouldn't have a chance an opportunity in this industry because it's somewhat buffered because a lot of people won't look at it right now, right? So it opens up opportunities because you're not going to compete against Google right now and you're not going to compete against Philip Morris because they won't get in yet. But that federal challenge needs to be resolved soon for this industry to fully realize its potential. That will clear up a lot of issues if and when that happens, even if it's a move to clearly codify into the law that states can decide this issue for themselves, and then regulate it under federal guidelines to make sure there's oversight. So that's a big challenge that will clear up the banking and tax situations. But then you have the growing pains of an industry right now. It's moving from crawling to kind of wobbling on 2 feet like a toddler, and there's all the challenges that come to that, and it's it stumbles and it falls, and there are bad players in the industry, and there are things that just work themselves out naturally. A lot of companies are struggling with growth right now. They were founded a couple of years ago by entrepreneurs who took big risks in an industry most people thought was a joke, and now their companies have reached another level, and they don't know how to scale them. They don't have true business professionals that have done that in their companies. So that's an industry challenge right now. And then you're having, for the first time, a lot of these challenges that were not present here, but that are, visible and frequent in every other industries, like business lawsuits for failed partnerships, or, HR type lawsuits, legal things like that every other industry deals with are now working their way into this. And then you just have the continuing march of legalization. If the industry stumbles, it gets broadcast everywhere. The media is hyper interested in this industry, and so if there is a problem, you get it, you read about it everywhere. If there's someone who kills someone and is found with marijuana in their system that they bought in a legal state, then people jump to conclusions. Although if you compare that with alcohol, it's not even close. So there's the perception issues that the industry still has to be on its toes and go above and beyond expectations and regulations to kind of prove itself to the nation. And then you have the biggest threat is going to be the arrival of these big companies. This has traditionally been a very mom and pop industry. It's changing. In Colorado, we have chain stores that have come up, and they have 20, 25 locations under one name, and each store kind of feels the same. That's not how the industry was a year or two ago. So you're going to see this kind of consolidation, this path, down the road that looks like every other industry. So those are going to be the challenges. And how do the people that risk their livelihood when this had a stigma, how do they stay involved as this grows? And they're competing against more savvy business professionals that are coming in from other industries, which we are seeing, by the way, daily. The industry is professionalizing, but it's also pushing a lot of people out.
Are there any American companies on publicly trading exchanges, marijuana affiliated, that are actually making money like the Canadian ones? Because the Canadian ones have, I think, both Canopy and Aurora have over $200 million in cash and cash equivalents on their balance sheets. These are legit companies. They have pretty good long-term prospects. They're not going to have to go raise capital all the time just to survive. So, are there American publicly traded companies actually making any money now?
Some of them are making money, but again, almost all of them are penny stocks, and the financial visibility into them is weak, and a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them are kind of like buyer beware, stay away. We don't know what this company does. The modern day equivalent of a pets.com, where if you found out the financials, they just don't add up, and so that's what it is. I mean, you have GW Pharma, which is actually a British company, which trades on the NASDAQ, which is one of the more, I guess, stable business models. And then you have like a REIT, a real estate investment trust group that focuses on the marijuana industry, that went public this year on, I believe, the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. Don't use my words on that. You can add that in yourself. So I'm not sure. I forget which exchange it was, but and I don't think they didn't have a very good run so far. But other than that, it's a lot of these penny stocks. Very few of which actually are involved in the retail, cultivation, or infused product side of the industry.
This is all very fast.
Nowhere near, the Canada and U.S. public markets for cannabis companies are just night and day.
Yeah, the issue with the bank seems to be one of the biggest hurdles from reading the book Big Weed so far. If the large banking institutions were able to actually, raise the capital, make the loans, this thing would be a lot more smooth right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Corporate financing and raising money has traditionally been an issue in this industry. Now it's loosened up as more investment money is flowing into it. But, these companies can't get SBA-backed loans. They can't get bank loans in most cases. So, that's really holding the industry back. But, it is really for the retailers, it's that tax issue that's really killing them. Even the ones with, like I said, 20, 25 locations might be just barely making a profit, even though they seem to be doing really well, because at the end of the day, when you have a huge tax burden, which could, by the way, hit 70 or 80% in some cases, that takes away all your profits. So that's a big part of the industry that's struggling right now, is these retailers, because of the tax issue.
Yeah, the governments are going to have to learn to curb that back, because if they take too much, keep raising the taxes, perpetually every single year, or even in the Big Weed book, it seemed like taxes were going up every couple of months. If they keep doing that, the businesses, their margins are going to be destroyed, like you said, or they're going to have to keep raising costs to the customer. And at some point, the customer is going to say, well, the cost of legal weed is very expensive. And then, you're going to have a substitute or a marginal buyer go and be willing to buy the weed illegally again, which, obviously if you're a state and you have a lot of tax revenues coming in, you don't want.
Yeah, that's another big challenge for the industry, is figuring out the appropriate tax rate, and that strikes a balance between, getting a state money from this industry and enough for enforcement of the laws and the regulations, and also to benefit other things like schools and roads, which you're seeing happening all over, but not making them too high that you force people to the black market. That's the worst possibility, and that has happened in some areas. But just to clarify, when I was talking about the tax hit, it's more the federal government tax hit than the state that's really crippling parts of the industry, and that's again because of this 280E provision that essentially was created for people selling drugs, illegal drugs, that they can't take a dealer couldn't take a business deduction for it. But that applies to these retailers. They're licensed by states and they meet all these regulations. They paid all this money on compliance and to receive their licenses. And then again, they get an 80% tax hit from the federal government because they can't write off all these common, business expenses. That's what's crazy about this industry is the federal government will tax it and take that money, and they demand that money, but they still say by the way, it's illegal, and you shouldn't be doing this, whatever. But they'll take the money, and they won't let the companies have bank accounts. It's just a ridiculous situation when you think about it.
Well, in general, I'm a libertarian. I think governments are hypocritical. So
yeah, in this case, absolutely.
But this has been an extremely fascinating discussion, Chris. You are really at the epicenter here, because from what you were saying a little bit earlier in the conversation, it sounds like, the tone of the mainstream media when they are covering the marijuana industry is, basically rooting against it, extremely negative. When something bad happens in the industry, it's highlighted. And, you guys at the Marijuana Business Daily are highlighting, the growth and the positives of the industry as it fights to become more acceptable and become more mainstream.
Well, and we're also we're shining a light on the bad parts of it too. There have been companies that are struggling and stumbling, and they've made bad decisions, and there's problems with testing in the industry where the results are inconsistent, and there are irreputable players, and we're trying to give people information, people in the industry information about it, whether it's positive or negative, but to ultimately further it and professionalize it by doing that. And let me be clear with the mainstream media. They've actually changed a lot from, making fun of the industry in their stories and putting, weed puns in their headlines and the stories, and they are taking it more seriously. And I'd say that a lot of the coverage is actually favorable, but about the industry itself. But when there is an incident, like the media does, then that blows up. But the great thing is that since recreational marijuana has been legalized in Colorado, for instance, with sales starting in, a couple years ago, I can count on one hand the number of incidents that were tied to this, like serious incidents. And even those are are suspect because the people were, on other things like painkillers or also drunk. And that is in several years. Now imagine if you looked at the incidents involving alcohol, domestic abuse, traffic accidents, shootings, whatever.
Opioids, yeah. I mean, the major crisis now is opioids.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, and just to be clear, so people know, yes, we're in the industry, yes, we're a proponent of it, but I come from a journalism background and try and tell things straight, and I'm bullish on the industry. But I always said when I got into this business, if it was found to have a negative impact on society, I'm out. I have a daughter, I have a wife, but I haven't seen it. And in fact, again, there's so many people being employed by this industry, professionals and business opportunities, and it's really thriving, and it's great to see.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch the story develop. There's a lot of really cool programming on Netflix. Netflix has had a documentary. They just had a really cool fictional show about did you see that one with Kathy Bates
Disjointed.
where she's yeah, Disjointed. Yeah, that one's hilarious. I actually just finished that a couple weeks ago. Yeah, that was great.
What's interesting with that is that it also shows what we were talking about earlier about mainstream companies willing to, attach their names to this. I mean, Netflix, it wasn't like they just ran a marijuana-themed show. They actually worked with a dispensary to develop strains tied to the show. And that was a partnership between a very mainstream company and what is considered an illegal company by the federal government. So, that's another example of how companies in the mainstream are actually, taking this industry seriously, trying to dip their toes in it, and, hoping for some kind of returns.
That sounds like something Netflix did to do some background research to get some more free pot.
Yeah, potentially, right. I'm sure it worked well for them.
Well, Chris, I really enjoyed our discussion. This is a very exciting industry. I want to thank you again for your time today. And, let's get you back on in the future to have an update on the industry, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of exciting news events going forward. If our listeners want to follow more of your work, how do they do so?
We're at mjbizdaily.com. Or marijuanabusinessdaily.com. And, we do market research, and we have a print magazine, and, we have a website, and we have business conferences. I mean, it's this is a real industry, and I hope that's the takeaway for your audience from this.
Now, last question before I let you go. You mentioned that there was 18,000 people showed up at your last conference. For comparison purposes, for perspective, how much has that grown in the last couple of years?
We did our first business conference in this industry in 2012 in Denver, and we had 400 people. And we thought that was a rousing success. We had 400 attendees and 30 exhibitors, and we were trying to professionalize the industry. So you're talking suits and ties and, $400, $500, $600 registration, not $20, to get in, and people in flip-flops and tie-dye and, wearing Rasta hats. This is business conference. So we had 400. And then this last one we just had in Vegas had 18,000. So that basically is a reflection of the growth of this entire industry. And, it really captures where it's gone. And I think we've done a good job with our events and on what we do. But, it's the industry. It's just booming.
I agree, and this is an exciting time right now. There's cryptocurrency and marijuana is a lot of things that could potentially drastically disrupt mainstream society. So thank you again for your time, and definitely have you back on in the near future for more updates on the marijuana industry, because I think with the growth there is a lot of opportunity.
Absolutely, and I'm happy to join anytime. Thanks.